Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to the Winning Digital Customer Show. I am Howard Tiersky, and today we are going to talk about commodities. I hear pretty often from companies, clients, and other executives bemoaning the fact that their product or service is viewed as a commodity, and that creates problems for them from a pricing perspective, from a competitive perspective, et cetera. So today I want to talk about commodities. I don't know if you are one or if you are not one. If you are one and you don't want to be one, I am going to give you 8 specific techniques to de-commoditize to the degree your product may be perceived as a commodity, meaning it's not perceived as differentiated, meaning customers figure, I don't care whether I buy Mobil gasoline or Chevron gasoline or British Petroleum gasoline. Gasoline is gasoline. It's a commodity. If your customers perceive your products or services in that way, and you don't want them to, I'm going to give you 8 techniques to move the other direction, to get your products or services to be more differentiated and less commoditized. I remember as a kid in probably 4th or 5th grade, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago in a town called Lincolnwood near Skokie, Illinois. And I remember one of the big field trips that we would take is to go to the Chicago Board of Trade. And at the Chicago Board of Trade, they were trading commodities. You had traders, it was a very dramatic, energetic scene. There was this big floor of people, and they had all these slips of paper, and someone would run to the middle and hold up a slip of paper that said, I have 10 million barrels of pork bellies or whatever. And people would be screaming prices, trying to get the best deal on the pork bellies, and they'd scribble all these things on a piece of paper. And that seemed to be what went on there all day, every day. I can only imagine that if you worked there, you'd wind up like stressed out and hoarse every day coming home from work. But apparently it was very exciting. One of my friends' fathers had a seat, as they called it, I believe, on the Chicago Board of Trade. And he made a lot of money. And I think it was an exciting job for him. In any case, but nevertheless, commodities is not necessarily the game that everyone wants to be in. Let's talk a little bit about what it means to be a commodity and why it might be good or bad for your product or service to be a commodity. And then, as I promised, I'm going to give you 8 specific techniques you can use to move away from being a commodity if that's not what you want. So first of all, what do we mean when we say a commodity? Very often, we mean things like, as shown in the graphic, corn, coffee, coal, wheat, gold, oil, things that are fungible, things that people perceive as they're available from many different places. If you want to buy corn, there's a lot of places you can buy corn, and they're perceived as being not differentiated, meaning it doesn't matter whether I buy corn or oil or whatnot from company A or for company B, it's the same product. And that's what we mean by something being a commodity. I mentioned gasoline earlier, for example. Gasoline is very much a commodity. In fact, when I had the opportunity years ago to work for one of the leading petroleum companies in the world for a project, I learned something which I did not know, which is, I don't think I want to say the name of this company, but it was a leading brand that you'd be familiar with and have gas stations and all that, and oil refineries and all these types of things. And what I learned is that this company that I worked for, that I was working on behalf of, they, of course, were in the business of drilling oil up out of the ground and refining it into different things, including gasoline for cars, as well as for airplanes and other products. And then they also had gas stations, right, with their logo on it along the highway and all that, where you could go fill your car up. But here's the funny thing that I learned, which is that the gas that they refined wasn't necessarily being sold at their gas stations. That they had distribution centers where trucks could come and fill up with gasoline, and those trucks would then deliver that gasoline to gas stations, but not necessarily to their gas stations, meaning any given one of their gas stations may very well be selling gasoline from one of their competitors, and their competitors very often could be selling gasoline from their refineries. There was just no connection. Just because company A was the one that refined it doesn't necessarily mean it wound up at their service station. It just went to whoever was most convenient. Why? Because it didn't matter, because gasoline was gasoline and there was no difference. So that's a commodity. When there's really no difference, it's so meaningless, the difference, that company A is willing to sell company B's product and vice versa, because literally it doesn't make any difference. And I wanted to make this point that in today's world, there's kind of 2 ways that you can be commoditized. And one way is to have a product that is a commodity, gasoline. If you're a company that sells gasoline, that you refine gasoline, the value of that gasoline that you're selling, is kind of defined by whatever the market is willing to pay for gasoline in general. It's very hard to sell your gasoline for more because it's all the same. Why would anyone pay more for your gasoline? So that's having a product, which is a commodity. But then you can also sell a product. So like you can see why gasoline is a commodity, but is an iPhone a commodity? Well, if you're Apple, the iPhone is definitely not a commodity because it's a unique and differentiated product. And there are people who would die rather than buy a Samsung phone or some other brand of phone. So you clearly sell a highly differentiated product. So as a manufacturer, Apple's iPhone is absolutely not a commodity. But what about if you're Amazon? Is the iPhone a commodity? And the answer is kinda. It's kind of a commodity because it is available many places. And if you're just another store that you can plop your credit card down and buy an iPhone that you can also buy at Best Buy, you can also buy at a Verizon store, you can also buy at a million other places, then possibly that is a commodity. And so retailers can all of a sudden feel like they're in the commodity business if all they're doing is selling the same product that you can buy, an unlimited number of other places. So products can be commoditized, but retailers can also be commoditized. And perhaps there's even another model of that you might think of in your own industry or your own industry's kind of supply or distribution chain where the thing might start out differentiated. Products can start out as commodities like coffee beans and wind up differentiated like a cup of Starbucks coffee, right? Clearly there's a difference. There's a commodity. People would be willing to pay more for a Starbucks cup of coffee, even though the beans that Starbucks buys may be considered a commodity and available to a lot of different companies. But products can also go the other way. They can start out as a differentiated product like an iPhone and wind up as a commodity because lots and lots of different retailers are selling them, and it really doesn't matter much, or it might not matter much, whether you're buying them from company A, company B, or company C. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, though, and how you can make it matter. Because, of course, if you're in the business of selling iPhones, you want to make sure that there's a reason why people should buy those iPhones from you and not from some other store. So we're going to be talking about that in a minute. But just to start, wanted to define, this is what we mean by a commodity. And so is it bad to be a commodity? Well, I've just been talking about why it might be bad to be a commodity. But, there are some advantages to being a commodity. I talked earlier about my friend's father who worked for the Chicago Board of Trade, buying and selling commodities his entire career. He made a fortune buying and selling commodities. If there's a marketplace available for your commodity, like the Chicago Board of Trade, there's a place you can go and without a lot of effort, make your commodity available. And you can have a very low cost of marketing and sales. When my friend's father was on the Chicago Board of Trade, if he came into possession of, 10,000 bushels of corn or whatever, he could literally simply stand up at the Chicago Board of Trade and say, who wants to buy 10,000 bushels of corn? How much are you willing to pay? And he could sell that right away. He didn't have to convince anybody that his bushels of corn were different or better than anybody's. He didn't have to come up with a fancy slogan or tagline for his bushels of corn, right? He could just go up there and sell his bushels of corn. So, you have that very low cost of marketing and sales, assuming there's a marketplace of some sort available. And of course, there are many different types of marketplaces online for many different types of commodities. And if the price shoots up, profit can be really high. I'm sure there were some commodities that when COVID hit and all of a sudden they were more in demand, if you were in possession of a warehouse full of, toilet paper, you might consider toilet paper a commodity. Depends, right? But let's just for a moment consider the toilet paper certainly could be viewed as a commodity. A lot of toilet paper is similar. All of a sudden, if the value shoots up, you're sitting on a bunch of toilet paper, you can make a huge amount of money. So this is, and of course, I put my little GameStop thing in the background because you could argue that a stock share is a kind of a commodity in the sense that a lot of people own shares of GameStop or own shares of any company. And there's a marketplace. If I want to sell my shares of GameStop, I don't have to convince anybody or my shares of GameStop are better than someone else's shares of GameStop. Clearly they're not. And there's a marketplace. And so what I'm really counting on is that the value of those shares is going to grow over time. So if I'm holding a commodity like coffee beans or a share of or oil or a share of GameStop or any other company, and the price goes up, I could potentially make a lot of money. The downside of being a commodity is that you're differentiating primarily on price. Nobody's going to pay me more for my share of GameStop than they're going to pay for someone else's share of GameStop because I'm smarter, better, faster, have a better tagline, have a better brand. I mean, it doesn't matter. So I'm just competing on price. If the price is rising, I can still do well, but I'm able to charge the same as everybody else in the market. In fact, if I want to make a sale, what I actually have to do is charge just a tiny bit less, because that's who people buy when there's a constant market on the stock exchange, and this is true in most commodities. And who's ever charging the lowest prices, those are the ones that get bought. And just like the price could go up, if you're holding a commodity, if demand drops or supply increases, the value could decrease. You could have a commodity, the value could actually decrease, and you could actually lose money on your commodity. So these are some downsides of being essentially in the commodity business. In my business, working in consulting with large brands, most brands do not want to embrace being a commodity. Usually what they're trying to figure out is, if they are a commodity, how can they get out of being a commodity? And I should add that it's not an absolute yes or no, are you a commodity? In fact, even within commodities, there are grades, right? If you're looking at coffee beans, all coffee beans are not a commodity. There are different grades of coffee beans, but within a given grade of coffee bean, it's considered a commodity. And, there are, of course, other things, like I mentioned earlier, toilet paper, things like that, where, there's some brand preference, there's some difference between those products. It's just not perceived as being, in many cases, a huge difference. And so you might want to think of commodity as being on a continuum. A Lamborghini is on one end of the continuum. No one's going to argue that all sports cars are the same. And certainly no one's going to argue that all cars are the same. Then on the other end of the continuum, you have something like gasoline, like I mentioned before, or bleach. Clorox sells bleach, but bleach is like a chemical compound. You can make it in a lab. There's no difference between the bleach that you buy from one brand versus another. If there were, it wouldn't be bleach. And so that's the other end. But then you have things that are all along a continuum in the middle. Is a Toyota a commodity? No, it's not a commodity, but it's certainly not as unique as a Lamborghini. And as toilet paper is not a complete commodity, but it's fairly commoditized. And you could probably come up with products that exist everywhere along that continuum. So let's talk about if you have a commoditized product, even if it's not a 100% commodity, you're sitting there thinking, okay, I sell something, a product or a service that frankly is available a lot of places. Maybe I do bookkeeping. And there's a lot of places people could go for bookkeeping. And the way I do bookkeeping, it's not really that different from the way that you do bookkeeping at a lot of other places. Or maybe I sell copies of the latest best-selling books at my newsstand. But there's a lot of places where you can buy those books. I sell apples, I'm a plumber, whatever it may be. And you say, the reality is they can call me as a plumber, but there's a zillion plumbers in the phone book, and we all do basically the same thing. And one way of competing, if you really truly view it as a commodity, is to just try to be the cheapest plumber. But then it can be hard to make a living if you're being the cheapest, right? The race to the bottom price-wise is usually a strategy that most businesses would prefer to avoid. So now we're going to get to the heart of our discussion today, which is the 8 ways to try to decommoditize a product. If you think of that continuum that I talked about before, where gasoline is on one end, where even the brands that make it know it doesn't make a darn bit of difference whether they're selling their gas or someone else's gas, all the way to the other end, where let's not even talk about Lamborghinis. There are unique models of Lamborghinis. There are times when Lamborghini will make only one, a special edition Lamborghini, right? Or the same could be true of a watch. Patek Philippe may have a certain issue that they only make 100 of them, but once in a while there'll be one they only make 5 of, or only 1 of, right? That's an absolutely differentiated product. There's only one in the world like that. So you've got this continuum, and very often businesses are trying to move towards this side of the continuum. They want their product to be more differentiated so that they can charge more. They don't have to have a race to the bottom from a price perspective. They can bring in more customers with lower cost of sales, less marketing, less advertising. Customers are drawn to them as a place to buy something because they perceive it to be different. They perceive it to be unique, instead of just saying, well, I can buy the same thing from 50 different places, so I'll just go wherever's cheapest. Okay, so let's dive in. What are the 8 ways to differentiate? The first is relationship. If I can buy gas anywhere, but one gas station, there's a guy, Mo, he's run the gas station for 40 years. I know him. I've known him since I was a kid. He's a buddy of mine. I just like patronizing Mo. A lot of salespeople take this approach. If they're selling a product that's kind of commoditized, they focus on, how do I build a strong relationship so that, you know, on the show The Office, right? Dunder Mifflin, remember? They're selling paper, copy paper, right? Which really feels like a commodity. I mean, after all, every time I put copy paper in the machine, I never look and see what brand of copy paper it is. If my office manager decided to switch the brand of copy paper that we used or printer paper, I doubt I'd even notice. I certainly wouldn't wonder about it or worry about it, because to me, in my experience, all that copy paper is pretty much the same. But if there's somebody who's a great salesperson and really builds a great relationship with my office manager, then maybe she's going to keep buying the copy paper from them because she likes them, as long as they're not, you know, the price isn't too much out of line with what it might ordinarily be, but they might not necessarily go shop around as much because they value that relationship. And relationship isn't just about being friendly. It can also about making sure that, you know, you're there for them if they have a special need, stuff like that. And that's actually going to get into another category we're going to talk about, which is service. But just the pure relationship, that's one of the 8 ways. So thinking about, ask yourself in your own business, what are you doing to really create a relationship with your customer and make them want to buy from you, even if everybody's selling the same thing you are? Okay, let's look at the second one. The second one is features. Can you add a feature to your product that the competitor doesn't have that people want, and all of a sudden it's not commoditized? There's lots of categories that fight on features, right? Cameras. You could argue that, well, you know, Nikon makes, like, let's take high-end, you know, DSLR cameras or any level of camera. It could be a small point and shoot. Doesn't matter. Nikon makes them, Canon makes them, Sony makes them, Panasonic makes them, Fuji makes them, you know, Pentax makes them, et cetera, et cetera. So what's really the difference between the $299 level model from each of these companies? Well, it depends, but one of the reasons why someone might go with the Sony model is say, oh, the Sony model has better photography in low light, or the Sony model has a more powerful flash, or a battery that lasts longer. What can you do to build into your product some kind of feature that differentiates? It's kind of classic product differentiation. So that's one way to decommoditize. And, you know, if your toilet paper is the same as everyone else's toilet paper, what do we see toilet paper companies trying to do? Well, we've made it quilted, right? Or we've made more toilet paper on a roll. Figure out what you can do to make your product better. But it has to be better in a way that people care about, right? If your toilet paper is just a slightly different shade of white, you know, and the customer couldn't care less about that, then you haven't necessarily, you've created a difference, but you haven't created differentiation. So you have to make sure you're doing something that meets the customer's needs in a better way than if your product didn't have that feature. So that's the second way. And, you know, unfortunately, I can't give you all the answers for your business. I'm trying to give you a model here. And when I finish all 8 of these, you might want to print out this slide or sit down with your team, maybe show them this video, and then have a brainstorming session and say, let's look at each of these areas. How could we do more to differentiate maybe in all 8 of these areas? Or maybe you'll conclude that, you know, there's really only 3 or 4 of them that are the best ones for you, but those are ones you can really go to town and figure out and brainstorm what is the best way. By the way, if you're looking for brainstorming techniques, my book, Winning Digital Customers, Wall Street Journal best-selling book, available from Amazon and wherever fine books are sold, has a whole bunch of techniques for group brainstorming. And if you want to read the first chapter for free, you can go to winningdigitalcustomers.com. So that was my little plug and commercial. Back to our list. So we've talked about relationships and we've talked about features. And, you know, each of these we could talk about for 30 minutes. So I'm just trying to give you a high level on each of these. Number 3, brand. I'm sure you've had this experience, you know, walking down the aisle of the grocery store and there's canned peas, right? And there's, you know, I don't know, Del Monte canned peas or some brand that you know, and then there's that generic store brand of canned peas. Now, are those peas any different? Honestly, I don't know, but probably not different. And when you look at the price, you know, the Del Monte ones are 20 cents more, but a lot of people reach for the Del Monte ones because they're comfortable. They feel that that brand, that familiar brand, it gives them some sense of certainty, even if that's really not valid, and they purchase that. And so having a brand that people know, like, and trust is another way to create some level of differentiation. I mentioned Clorox earlier. That's a fantastic example because, you know, one brand of canned peas might be a little different from another brand of canned peas. Maybe they come from a better pea farm, pea field. I don't know, wherever they grow peas. Maybe they're higher quality peas. Maybe they package them better. I don't know. But bleach is the ultimate commodity because I said before, bleach is a chemical compound. It can't be any different if it's just pure bleach. And baking soda is the same thing, by the way. Baking soda is a chemical compound. Reaching for Arm & Hammer baking soda instead of generic baking soda, you know, it's very hard to imagine there's any difference at all, literally, in the molecules that are in that box. And yet a lot of people, Arm & Hammer obviously is willing to spend money on marketing to build a brand and charge more for their product because people are comfortable with the brand. So that's clearly a way to take a product that truly a commodity all the way on one end of the scale and create a perception of differentiation through brand. Now let's look at number 4. 4 is quality, purity, reliability. You're basically saying, yes, everybody makes the same thing, but ours is guaranteed to be more pure. That's another thing that people might perceive about something like Clorox. You just believe it's pure. Ivory soap, right? 99 and 99, 100% pure, or whatever their classic old advertising campaign is. But basically the belief, and this can kind of go hand in hand with brand, but you're basically letting people know that, sure, you can buy this from anywhere, but a lot of gas stations, we talked about gasoline earlier, focus on this. So if I'm providing bookkeeping services, let's use that as an example. We talked about that earlier. If I can convince you that you're going to get, yes, basically the same bookkeeping services, but it's overseen by a bookkeeping expert, by an MBA who spent 25 years doing bookkeeping, maybe that's going to give you a sense that you're going to get more reliable bookkeeping. Then in theory, it's the same. But as we all know that, you can open a can of peas and it can be spoiled, or it can have some other quality problem with it. And so if you can assure somebody that buying from you is going to have a higher level of quality or purity or reliability, then potentially that's a reason to differentiate what would otherwise be perceived as a commodity. All right, we're halfway there. Number 5, service. So it may be the same product or the same service, but you're getting better service. So let's go back to gasoline as an example. If I feel that I go to one service station and yes, the gasoline itself is the same as I would get somewhere else, but the pump is more available, the credit card transactions run faster, the guy runs out to my car and washes my windshield, the experience of getting the commodity is superior, then that creates some differentiation. And in the retail example that I gave earlier, I might feel like there's 5 different places I could buy my iPhone, but if I buy it from Apple, I know that I can come back and get help with it, that they're going to be really cool and helpful to me in choosing the iPhone. And maybe I feel that if I go to, Best Buy, it's just going to be a box on a shelf. I can buy it, but they're not going to be as knowledgeable. I don't know that to be true, by the way. I'm just giving this as an example. It may be that the people at Best Buy are wonderful when it comes to iPhones. I've never bought one there. I actually have an Android phone. But in any case, just take it as an example. Of course, there's always that opportunity to differentiate the experience of buying something based on service, even if the thing that you're buying itself, whether the thing is a product or a service, so let's use a service as an example, because I want to make a distinction between service as a way of differentiating between just a product versus a service. So let's say your service is plumbing and the actual service itself is the same. Your toilet is clogged, someone comes out, they unclog your toilet. And let's assume that there's 5 plumbers and they all can unclog your toilet. If they can't, then now you're talking about quality or reliability, right? If you're like, well, our plumbers are going to be more likely to be able to unclog your toilet than the other guy, that's a reliability differentiation. But if when you call for the plumber, they do a better job of taking the information from you. They keep you more updated on when the plumber is going to arrive. Maybe the bill is easier to understand. It's all the things other than that core thing that you're paying for. That's really what we mean here by service. And it's certainly possible, even if your plumber is no better or worse than the other guy's plumber, that the overall experience of calling and arranging for the plumber and dealing with the entire sort of customer journey of having a plumber come fix your toilet is better. And that kind of connects to ease and access as well. These two kind of go hand in hand, but just, for example, there might be 5 different places that I could buy, milk, but 7-Eleven differentiates. 7-Eleven doesn't sell anything that I can't buy at 100 other places, but they differentiate because they've just got stores everywhere. So the odds are that there's a 7-Eleven closer to you than a grocery store. And furthermore, it's smaller, so it's probably quicker to get in and out. You can park right next door. You can run right in. You can get some milk. You're probably not going to have to wait in line for more than a minute or two to pay, and you're out of there. Obviously, they call it a convenience store for a reason. And now you're willing to pay a little bit for the same gallon of milk because you've had an easier or more accessible experience. So that's another way to differentiate yourself. But that doesn't only have to happen in retail. Let's say that you're selling, some kind of industrial chemical that's used in manufacturing. Well, how can you differentiate on ease and access? Well, what's the people who are ordering that chemical? How can you make that process easier for them? Can you make it quicker for them to order? Can you provide them better information on the status of their order? Can you deliver it to them in a way that's easier for them to use that chemical to, put it into their machine or whatever it may be? So how can you make your company a preferred supplier of that chemical that they can get from anywhere by making it easier? So that's number 6. Number 7 is bundling. If you have something that's a commodity, one thing you can do is bundle it together with other things. Maybe some things that aren't a commodity, or multiple commodities, but just so that you're bundling it together in a way that feels like they're getting a better price. So let's take an example. Let's say you're a travel agent and you're selling vacations. Well, selling airline tickets is really a commodity because you can go any place and you can get a ticket, from on United Airlines from Newark to Jamaica. There's no reason for me to go to Liberty Travel versus another travel agent versus going direct to United Airlines or to Orbitz or anyone else to buy that airfare. It's probably going to be the same price. And you could probably say the same thing about hotels or other things. But if all of a sudden I create a custom bundle that brings together your flight, your hotel, a tour guide that's going to walk you around, now all of those things might be commodities. I could get each of them from many places, but I've brought them together in a way that's unique. No one else is offering that exact combination of the flight and this particular resort and the hotel, the tour guide and the free tickets to something. And now I've created a unique product out of what is nothing more than assembling what might all be commodities or mostly be commodities. So that's the bundling strategy. And the last one is price structures or guarantees. And I combine these things together because a guarantee in a way is really just a kind of an insurance, which normally you could also pay for as like an extended warranty. Again, it depends, of course, what your product is. So a price structure. So what is a price structure? I mentioned earlier that you want to try to avoid a race to the bottom. So if you're only trying to compete on price, you're not really decommoditizing. That's the classic approach to trying to sell a commodity. Is just be the cheapest place to buy pork bellies or whatever you're selling. A price structure is, for example, saying, let's say you're an energy company. Electricity might be perceived as a commodity. And a person buying electricity might just say, all right, well, I'm just going to go to whoever has the lowest price per kilowatt hour, which is normally how you buy electricity. But let's say you go to someone and say, all right, let me give you a structure. I'm going to give you a structure that says that instead of the price fluctuating all year long, I'm going to commit to always selling you electricity at 30 cents a kilowatt hour. And that protects you from the possibility that that price could rise in a way that would be disadvantageous to you. And now all of a sudden, I'm not just charging you the commodity price. I've created a kind of a guarantee around that price. Or maybe I make a deal that says the price for electricity right now is X, but I'm willing to sell you the electricity and lock in that price for 3 years, as long as you commit to continuing to buy that electricity from me for 3 years, like in a contract. So those would be different examples of price structures where all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that's a little different. That's just not, paying as you go for the prevailing price. And something like an Amazon, Amazon Prime is kind of like one of those structures as well. It says, well, if you commit to paying this, if you pay an annual fee that's not that great, we're going to commit to giving you upgraded shipping, even though, that might cost us more in the end. But again, they're blurring the decommoditization by giving you a different kind of pricing model. And a guarantee is kind of similar, is where you say, hey, listen, instead of having to buy an extended warranty, we're going to guarantee this for a longer period of time. We're going to double the manufacturer's warranty. Or if you're a product manufacturer, the guarantee is an opportunity to simply differentiate. If I have 2 cameras, one from Nikon and one from Sony, and as far as I can tell, they do all the same things, but the Nikon camera has a 5-year guarantee and the Sony camera has a 1-year guarantee, maybe that's enough of a reason for me to say, I'll go with this. And if I'm a retailer, I know, for example, if you buy a watch, there are some places, let's say you're buying a pre-owned expensive watch, there are some jewelry stores that will tell you, well, you get a 30-day guarantee from us because you can't get a guarantee from the manufacturer anymore. The watch might be 10 years old. It's no longer under manufacturer warranty, but we'll give you a 30-day guarantee from our store if you have a problem with it. And another store might be selling the exact same, Rolex Submariner in the same color, and they're going to say, well, we'll stand behind that watch for 3 years if you have a problem. And well, that's a value. And now you're taking something that, it's another example like the iPhone. You could argue that a Rolex Submariner is not a commodity because, of course, people prefer that to a lot of other kinds of watches. It's certainly not a commodity as a watch, but when that same exact Rolex Submariner is available from 25 different stores and you can find them on eBay and you can find them on a million websites and in a million jewelry stores, then it is a commodity from a retailer perspective. And then it's a question of how that retailer can differentiate through one of these, including it's offering you some kind of additional guarantee. So that is our lesson for today, our content for today. If you find yourself in a commodity situation, First of all, remember that there could be advantages to being a commodity. It's not always bad to being a commodity, but if that's not your gig, then here are 8 specific strategies, at least at a high level. Each of these could be a 30-minute live cast, of course, talking about the details of it. But here are 8 high-level strategies that you can brainstorm and think about how you can apply them to your own products, your own services, your own business to decommoditize with the hopeful resulting goal of making it less expensive to acquire a customer and or less necessary to take that price race to the bottom. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. As always, I thank you so much for watching or listening or however you're receiving or perceiving this live cast. I know it's now being sent out a whole bunch of different places. And if you ever have questions about any of this content, I encourage you to post it in the chat, whether it's on wherever you're looking at it, YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever. And we will try to answer those questions either on a future live cast or in the chat themselves. So with that, as I said, thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.